The kingdom of Judah was in a state of spiritual decay. The once vibrant and faithful nation had fallen into a deep abyss of moral and spiritual corruption. Idolatry had taken root, spreading its darkness across the land. The people had erected idols and false gods in every corner, forsaking the teachings and commandments that had once guided them. The people had turned away from the one true God, embracing instead the empty promises of false gods. They engaged in rituals and practices that led them further away from the path of righteousness. It was a time of uncertainty and fear. The kingdom was plagued by internal strife and external threats, leaving the people in a state of constant anxiety. Hope seemed like a distant memory. The streets were desolate, and the marketplaces, once bustling with life, were now abandoned and silent. But then, a light emerged from the darkness. A glimmer of hope began to shine through the clouds of despair. A new king ascended to the throne of Judah. His coronation was a moment of great significance, a turning point that would change the course of the kingdom's history. His name was Hezekiah, and he would become a beacon of hope for his people. With a heart full of faith and a vision for a renewed Judah, Hezekiah took on the mantle of leadership. Hezekiah was a man of deep faith and unwavering conviction. He spent hours in prayer, seeking guidance and strength from the God of his ancestors. He believed in the God of his ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Hezekiah knew that the foundation of his reign must be built on the principles and promises of this enduring faith. He knew that the only way to save his kingdom from destruction was to return to the Lord. Hezekiah sought counsel from the priests and immersed himself in the sacred scriptures. Hezekiah was determined to restore true worship in Judah. He initiated the restoration of the temple, removed the idols, and rebuilt the sacred sites that had been desecrated. He knew that it wouldn't be easy. The people had been accustomed to their idolatrous ways, and change was met with resistance and conflict. But Hezekiah was undeterred. He addressed the defiant crowds with passion and conviction, urging them to return to the true worship. Slowly, the people began to heed his call. He was a man on a mission, driven by a deep love for his people and a burning desire to see them reconciled to their Creator. He led by example, participating in prayers and rituals, showing his people the way back to faith. Hezekiah's reign marked a turning point in the history of Judah. His efforts to restore true worship and faith brought about a transformation of hearts and minds. His faith and determination to lead him to the future. Hezekiah inherited a kingdom steeped in idolatry. Generations of turning away from God had left their mark on the hearts and minds of the people. False gods and pagan rituals had become deeply entrenched in their culture. The very fabric of Judean society seemed to be woven with threads of spiritual rebellion. But Hezekiah's heart burned with a different kind of fire. From a young age, he had developed a deep and abiding love for the God of Israel. He had studied the scriptures, learning of God's mighty acts and his unwavering faithfulness. He knew that the gods of wood and stone could offer no real hope or salvation. Hezekiah understood that the path to restoring Judah's relationship with God would be long and arduous. He knew that he would face opposition from those who clung to their idols and resisted change. But he was determined to be a catalyst for spiritual revival, no matter the cost. Hezekiah's reign was marked by a stark contrast, the darkness of idolatry juxtaposed against the radiant light of his faith. He refused to let the sins of his predecessors define the future of his kingdom. Instead, he chose to embrace the God of his ancestors, leading his people on a journey of repentance and restoration. The temple in Jerusalem stood as a silent witness to the spiritual decline of Judah. Its once majestic walls, now crumbling, echoed the fading devotion of its people. Once a place of vibrant worship and holy reverence, it had been desecrated by idolatry, its sacred spaces defiled by pagan practices. The songs of praise that once filled the air were replaced by the hollow chants of false worship. The very heart of Judah's religious life had been corrupted, its sanctity tarnished by the presence of false gods. The idols stood as grim reminders of the people's betrayal of their covenant with the one true God. Hezekiah knew that true reform had to begin with the temple. He understood that the physical restoration of the temple was symbolic of the spiritual renewal that Judah desperately needed. He ordered the temple doors to be opened, and he himself led the way into the neglected sanctuary. The king's presence was a powerful statement, a declaration that the time for change had come. The sight that greeted them was disheartening: altars to foreign gods, idols standing where they didn't belong, and an overwhelming sense of spiritual desolation. The once sacred halls were now filled with the stench of neglect and the weight of spiritual decay. Without hesitation, Hezekiah set about cleansing the temple. He knew that this was not just a physical task, but a spiritual mission to reclaim the heart of Judah. He commanded the priests and Levites to remove the idols, to rid the temple of every trace of false worship, to tear down the pagan altars, to dismantle the structures that had no place in the house of God, and to carry out all the ritual cleansing prescribed by the law of Moses. Every corner of the temple was to be purified, every defiled object removed. It was a monumental task, a physical manifestation of the spiritual cleansing that Hezekiah longed to see in his kingdom. The priests and Levites worked tirelessly, their efforts a testament to their renewed faith and dedication. As the temple was purified, so too were the hearts of the people beginning to stir. The sight of the temple being restored to its former glory rekindled a sense of hope and reverence among the people. The sight of their king leading the way in restoring the holiness of their sacred space ignited a spark of hope in their souls. Hezekiah's leadership was a beacon, guiding his people back to their faith. The cleansing of the temple marked a turning point, a symbolic return to God, and a recommitment to the covenant that bound them as his chosen people. It was a moment of renewal, a fresh start for a nation that had strayed far from its spiritual roots. The people, inspired by their king's devotion, began to return to the ways of their ancestors, embracing the laws and traditions that had once defined their identity. Section 4. The shadow of Assyria looms large. While Hezekiah worked tirelessly to restore Judah's spiritual foundations, a dark cloud gathered on the horizon. The mighty Assyrian Empire, known for its ruthlessness and insatiable appetite for conquest, had set its sights on Judah. Their armies were vast and formidable, leaving a trail of shattered kingdoms in their wake. Word reached Hezekiah of the approaching Assyrian threat. Their king, Sennacherib, was a fearsome warrior, known for his cruelty and his utter disdain for the God of Israel. He had already conquered many nations, and now he was determined to add Judah to his list of vanquished foes. Fear gripped the hearts of the people. They had heard tales of the Assyrian brutality, of cities razed to the ground, and of citizens led away in chains. The shadow of the approaching army seemed to stretch across the land, casting a pall over the fragile hope that Hezekiah had so carefully nurtured. The threat from Assyria presented Hezekiah with an agonizing dilemma. Should he trust in his own military strength, or should he place his faith in the God he served? Would the God of Israel, the God who had delivered his people from slavery in Egypt, once again intervene to save them from a seemingly insurmountable foe? Section 5. Sennacherib's threat, a test of faith. Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, was a master of psychological warfare. His reputation as a ruthless and cunning leader preceded him, striking fear into the hearts of those who dared to oppose him. He knew that fear could be just as effective as any sword or spear. The mere mention of his name was enough to send shivers down the spines of his enemies. So he sent his messengers ahead of his army, carrying with them messages designed to demoralize the people of Judah and to shake their faith in Hezekiah and their God. These messengers were skilled in the art of intimidation, their words carefully crafted to sow seeds of doubt and despair. The Assyrian messengers stood outside the walls of Jerusalem, their voices echoing through the streets, mocking Hezekiah and belittling the God of Israel. They shouted their threats and insults, their voices dripping with contempt and arrogance. They boasted of Sennacherib's invincibility, claiming that no god or army could stand against the might of Assyria. They recounted the tales of cities that had fallen before them, of kings who had been humbled and nations that had been crushed. Their words were like poison arrows aimed at the hearts of the people. Each taunt, each boast, was designed to erode their confidence and weaken their resolve. Hezekiah found himself caught in a vice, squeezed between the taunts of Sennacherib and the growing fear of his own people. The weight of leadership pressed heavily upon him, and the burden of responsibility was almost too much to bear. He knew that if he gave in to despair, if he allowed doubt to cloud his judgment, all would be lost. The fate of his kingdom rested on his shoulders, and he could not afford to falter. His faith and the fate of his kingdom hung precariously in the balance. The eyes of his people were upon him, looking to him for guidance and strength in this time of crisis. This was a test of Hezekiah's faith, a crucible in which his true character would be revealed. In the quiet moments of prayer, he sought the strength and wisdom to lead his people through this dark hour. Would he crumble under the weight of Sennacherib's threats, or would he stand firm, his trust anchored in the God who had promised to be his shield and his defender? The answer to this question would determine the future of his kingdom. The eyes of his people and the eyes of heaven were upon him. In this moment of trial, Hezekiah's faith would be his greatest weapon, and his unwavering trust in God would be the key to his people's survival.